Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. It is entitled, Are the Kids All Right? How to Support Children and Youth with Mental Health Challenges. I am Kanika Young. I am the Senior Director of Health Policy and Advocacy at the Tennessee Justice Center. Before we get started, I want to go over a couple of logistics. First of all, the webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be shared with everyone who registered. Also, a copy of the slides that will be presented today will be emailed out to everyone afterwards. And if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and we will have time at the end, hopefully, to get to those. So first, I'd like to just give a little background about the Tennessee Justice Center for those who aren't familiar. TJC has been around for 25 years, and we serve clients all over the state of Tennessee, although our office is based in Nashville. We do individual casework, which includes helping people enroll in TennCare and Cover Kids. We also help enrollees with service issues as well as redetermination issues, which relates to renewing eligibility for these programs. In addition to TennCare and Cover Kids, we also have a nutrition team that helps people with SNAP and WIC issues. So if you ever encounter anyone who has problems with any of these programs related to health insurance or nutrition, please feel free to give TJC a call at the number listed. We also provide training and technical assistance to partner organizations, which this training is an example of one of those, as well as advocacy work. We focus on identifying systemic issues from the casework and the relationships that we have with partners to figure out what barriers are tripping a lot of people up and how do we address those barriers on a systemic level through our advocacy. So that includes lobbying, grassroots organizing, as well as litigation. And one example of our advocacy work would be educational efforts that we embark on. We try to educate the public and policymakers about issues impacting health, and adverse childhood experiences is a topic that's connected to both physical and mental health, which is timely for today's webinar. So I want to share the latest brief that we've produced at the Tennessee Justice Center. It's entitled Breaking the Cycle: How Tennessee's Health Crises Relate to Adverse Childhood Experiences. This paper talks about the prevalence of ACEs in Tennessee and how they are connected to poor health outcomes, as well as the opioid crisis and poor health of our workforce, as well as the role of healthcare in reducing ACEs. It also contains some recommendations about advocating for comprehensive screenings for ACEs for both parents and children to try to break the cycle of transmitting ACEs from generation to generation. It also recommends expanding Medicaid to ensure that more people can receive proper care and screening for ACEs, and also adding ACEs education to grade school curriculum so children are aware of ACEs and how they can better advocate for themselves if necessary. So I encourage you to read it, and I will be putting a link to the paper in the chat for those who want to click on that to check it out later. So now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our guest today from Mental Health America of the Mid-South, who will be talking specifically about mental health challenges for children and youth and some of the programs that they have at Mental Health America to help youth. So first, we have Heather Smith. Heather is the new Erasing the Stigma Youth Program Coordinator for the Middle Tennessee region, coordinating student presentations and professional development webinars for teachers on essential mental health topics. She has worked for MHA over the last year as a case manager for unaccompanied immigrant youth and survivors of human trafficking, connecting individuals and families to educational, medical, mental health, legal, and other vital resources. Equipped with an MA of Intercultural Communication and Education, Heather is bilingual in Spanish and English and is experienced in building intercultural competencies, trauma-informed care, and social and emotional learning within education. While living abroad for several years, Heather had the opportunity to research and work in the field of student well-being. And as an ELL teacher in South Korea, she worked at a school for North Korean refugees, developing curriculum for social and emotional learning. Heather is excited to be back home in Middle Tennessee and aspires to see the newest generations of Tennesseans break through the barriers of stigma surrounding mental health, and her contact information is listed there. We also have joining us today Camille Carter. Camille has a BA in psychology and Spanish and her master's in education. She currently works with unaccompanied minors and their families during the reunification process by conducting home studies and providing case management services. She works for Mental Health America of the Mid-South, which is a sub-grantee of the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. She has worked with immigrants since 2010 through a literacy program at the YMCA and by teaching ESL. Camille holds a TESL certification from the Tennessee Language Center, and she enjoys traveling whenever possible, don't we all, and spending time with friends, her dog Baxter, and being in nature. So I will let Heather take over first up with her presentation, and thank you guys again for joining us. Heather? Heather, you probably need to unmute yourself. Heather, are you there?
I'm so sorry for that little delay there. I'm having a little bit of trouble accessing the screen where I can see everyone, but that's okay. Can everyone see my presentation with the, are the kids all right? Is that the screen that everyone's looking at?
Yes, we can see it and we can hear you.
Okay, great. I cannot see anyone, but that's all right. We will progress. Sometimes technology doesn't let us be fabulous, but we do what we can. All right, so good afternoon, and thank you all so much for being with us today as we talk about mental health concerns and support strategies for our Tennessee children and youth. So as Kanika mentioned, I work with Mental Health America, and I'm currently working as the coordinator for the Erasing the Stigma Youth Program. We provide education in schools, elementary, middle, and high schools across the state in different mental health topics. Including stress and anxiety management, anti-bullying, body image and eating disorders, and other topics. So that's my department of MHA, but let me tell you a little bit more about who we are as a whole. So MHA of the Mid-South was first established here in Nashville in 1946. We do not offer any direct services at the moment, so we don't offer counseling or therapy, but rather, we housed several different programs, including our caregiver support program for folks caring for loved ones who might have dementia or other mental health challenges. We also provide mental health first aid trainings. We house a Zero Suicide Initiative program, the ETSI program, which I already introduced, and our multicultural outreach program, which provides case management for unaccompanied immigrant youth and survivors of human trafficking, and which I'm excited that we have the opportunity to listen to my colleague Camille talk about in a little more depth later on. Camille's been a huge asset to that program, so we're fortunate to have her on board. If you have any questions about who we are, or if you'd like to access further resources regarding mental health, you can always go to our website, which is listed on this slide. Okay, so today, before we get started, I just thought I'd share a quick map of what we want to cover over the next 45 minutes or so. So first, we want to set the stage for our discussion by looking at the current state of mental health challenges and services as they pertain specifically to Tennessee children and youth. And next, we'll look at different signs and symptoms as a brief introduction to mental health first aid, before discussing practical strategies and coping mechanisms, before I pass it along to my colleague Camille, where we will zoom in on the concerns of our immigrant and refugee community. So as we take a look at the current situation of mental health needs for our Tennessee young people, I'm going to share a brief summary of the initial COVID-19 impact report, which is provided by the Child Wellbeing Task Force that was created for within the Department of Education. So I think I have the link to that. I just popped it into the chat. There's a link to that report, which you can access for more in-depth information after this presentation. And I highly recommend that you do so, as it's very informative. It's a very informative overview of the state's current needs, services, and path towards solutions. But I'll give you a bit of a preview now. So student mental health has been identified as a top priority for every school district in the country. Recent surveys show that superintendents in every state identify adolescents in crisis as a top 3 concern in their schools. And serious mental health related crises now affect more than a third of adolescents in America. The need to prioritize mental health was apparent to educators prior to the pandemic, meaning that the demand for these supports has really only increased. In fact, the MHA National Organization did a study this year finding that youth mental health is worsening. Specifically, they found that for youth ages 12 to 17, the frequency of experiencing a major depressive episode in the past year has increased from around 8.5% to 9% to 13%. Which means that nationally, these episodes are severely affecting over 2 million of our youth. And this trend was apparent prior to COVID-19 and has been particularly noticed by educators because schools serve as the primary platform where young people who struggle with mental health challenges are both identified and connected to treatment options. So to zoom in on our state level, prior to the pandemic, suicide was the 3rd leading cause of death for youth in Tennessee. And unfortunately, COVID-19 has caused additional hopelessness as indicated by increased suicidal ideation. As reported by WSMV Fox News, calls to suicide hotlines are up over 800%, and the overdose rate is up substantially. So this has implications both for children who are directly affected by suicidal ideation and for those with family members who are struggling or who may die by suicide, leading to potential trauma and resulting health implications for children who are not necessarily directly affected with those thoughts themselves. Additionally, in that study by MHA National, Tennessee was ranked 38th overall in youth mental health, 39th for overall child well-being, and according to the Annie E. Casey Foundation, as 48th in health. So as we consider the effects of COVID-19, it's essential to point out that access to technology and hardware provide both education as well as possible telehealth related services. So for students and families who do not have internet or hardware devices to connect remotely, the pandemic is even more devastating and has the potential for generating even greater inequities, right? And so for instance, the coronavirus has disproportionately impacted people of color. We see things like unemployment rates rising to generational heights and schools closing, not only impacting access to academics, but challenging the delivery of other essential services as well for various populations of our students. Such as students with disabilities, English learners, and those who are at risk. So in Tennessee, during peak stay-at-home orders, reports of suspected child abuse dropped by 27%, but that's actually in large part due to mandatory reporters, such as teachers and pediatricians, being disconnected from children and families. Approximately 25% of district leaders agree that they are able to adequately support the mental health needs of students through periods of pandemic-related school closure, and 53% are prepared and able to address or check on the wellness of and safety of students. And 76% of Tennessee district leaders and 55% of public responders identified technology and hardware as a top COVID-19 related need. So we're seeing further barriers to the the ways that we were already trying to tackle this challenge in schools is becoming even harder, obviously, because of the pandemic. But what do the mental health services here in Tennessee look like for children and youth? So while those needs that I mentioned are substantial, Tennessee has been working to address those concerns through its statewide community mental health continuum, statewide youth mobile crisis units with 24/7 response, as well as strong partnerships with local schools and districts. We've seen more than 45,000 children and youth accessed and 600,000 key behavioral health services. And this is all according to the Tennessee Association of Mental Health Organizations report. So those services are fundamental to responding to children's and youth's behavioral health care needs. So 5 of the key programs that are available would be, first, the school-based behavioral health liaisons, which are going to be doubled and cover all 95 counties with an aim to serve 20,000 children and youth in the 2021 fiscal year. The newly approved behavioral health safety net is another one for children and youth, aiming to serve up to 5,000 children and youth in the first year, providing a continuum of services that range from therapy, medication management, care coordination, education, and training. The third program is a dedicated youth mobile crisis unit that serves almost 12,000 youth. And those mobile crisis assessments can happen face-to-face. And that's reporting based on the fiscal year of 2019. And the fourth project would be the Project Rural Recovery, which we received federal funding to implement mobile integrated primary and behavioral health care buses in rural Tennessee counties. So this initiative is set to begin providing services to adults and children in November this year, so hopefully. This report was back in July, so I'm not sure about the update on that currently. And then the system of care, which focuses on providing wraparound services to children and families. So those are 5 of the main programs of services that are existing right now. Schools also have a powerful platform for children to access mental health services. Nationally, 75% of students receive mental health care in a school setting and are 21 times more likely to visit a school-based health clinic than a community-based clinic for mental health care. In regards to Tennessee, in 2017, data demonstrates that there are approximately 152,000 children estimated to have severe emotional disturbances, yet in 2019, data approximates that about 45,000 school-aged children were served through those community-based systems, which could have taken place either in school or out. So although not every student will develop a diagnosable mental health disorder or serious emotional disturbance, it could be argued that every student can benefit from mental health education, mental health literacy, and school-wide activities which promote positive mental well-being. So recognizing that mental health falls on a spectrum, utilizing this multi-tiered system of support can provide strategies that promote well-being for all students. Okay. So the most important takeaway for the path to solutions is that schools, community partners, and state agencies will need to collaborate in their efforts. There needs to be coordination across all sectors, along with the partnering of local partners and leaders who already have established relationships with the members of their communities. So these efforts should be streamlined to efficiently allocate and use resources, as well as avoid duplication of services. And while the situation is definitely exacerbated by the pandemic, it has, in a sense, served to highlight the opportunity for creating a service infrastructure with a legacy that extends beyond the pandemic. So it's really just brought to light not only that mental health concerns are important to address, but just how relevant it really is. Again, all of the information that I've just been sharing was a very brief summary of the information provided in that report, which I popped into the chat. And I really do encourage any of you who's interested in learning more to follow up there, as it's very informative. So we just looked a little bit at the systemic and policy side of this important topic, but today we'd also like to touch on ground level and even the interpersonal nature of this conversation. So here I'm going to provide some basic information, and this information is based on what you might find in a youth mental health first aid training, which is actually something that we at MHA do provide if anyone's interested in contacting me about setting that up. So let's think about some of the signs and symptoms that a young person might experience during a mental health crisis or challenge. So even for those of us who are not therapists or clinicians, like myself, this information can be very helpful for identifying when a young person in our lives might need our support or for us to connect them with a professional if they are going through a more severe experience. And so our job is never to diagnose someone, especially if we are becoming mental health first aiders, but rather we are there to observe, to reach out, and to empower them to access help if necessary. So a young person facing a mental health challenge may experience physical signs and symptoms, although most of these that you see on the left could plainly be indicating a physical concern. If a child is experiencing many of these along with those on the right, this could indicate that they might be experiencing a mental health challenge and not simply a physical concern. So for example, think about whether the youth in your life has been complaining of headaches and stomach aches, and you also notice that they've stopped caring as much about their appearance or the way they dress. That could be an indication of not only a physical concern with headaches, but also perhaps a mental health concern. And so those physical signs might appear along with these emotional and behavioral signs that you see listed now. And even though we might not observe their symptoms, it's important that if a child or a young person is telling us about any of those symptoms, that we listen non-judgmentally. And this will help us establish trust so that they're willing to receive any support we might offer. Or if we need to refer them to professional support, they're more willing to listen. So for example, what if you notice a young person you know has been withdrawing and crying a lot, but they come to you explaining that they have been experimenting with drugs or drinking. So you might be tempted to correct the behavior and just lecture them about the risks that they're taking. It can certainly be alarming, right? But it's important to recognize that those choices might be linked to a deeper issue rooted in a mental health challenge. And we want to respond in a way that encourages them to get help rather than shutting down the conversation. Research suggests that the most powerful protective factor in the lives of young people who are at risk for developing mental health challenges or illnesses is actually having a trusted adult in their life, whether that adult is family or not. So that's actually having that trusted adult is the most powerful protective factor. And I'm sure it's obvious that most of those signs and symptoms that were listed are often a part of the typical teenage experience. So while we don't want to overreact and assume that all young people in our lives are living with a mental health diagnosis, how can we tell when it's time to perhaps reach out and potentially connect them with a professional for support, right? It's essential that we examine the impact of change in their behavior or the signs and symptoms that they're demonstrating. So asking yourself, what is that impact? For example, it's perfectly normal for a young person to withdraw from family and spend more time with friends. Most of us probably did the same at that age. But what if they are isolating even from their friends? Okay, or also think about the extent of their symptoms. Have they been acting depressed or moody for weeks or months at a time? Are any of their symptoms interrupting their ability to handle basic responsibilities or enjoy hobbies and friends or life generally? So if their daily life is being impacted and the symptoms are ongoing and persistent, it's probably time for us to reach out. So now we're going to pivot and look at some different support strategies for helping our children and teenagers develop good mental health habits. Remember, whether or not someone is experiencing a mental health challenge or illness, mental health belongs to each and every one of us and is something that we need to learn to take seriously and to care for. So if we are a trusted adult in a kid or in a young person's life, we get to play a part in helping them develop resiliency. So let's look at some strategies for doing just that. So whether you're a teacher, a practitioner, or a parent, getting educated in social and emotional learning, also known as SEL, and trauma-informed care can provide you with valuable tools and strategies for empowering children to build up resiliency. Here at MHA, we actually offer professional development sessions, especially for teachers in those areas, because we want to help see more and more teachers across the state utilize these skills and those strategies in their classrooms. So first, let's consider SEL, or social and emotional learning. By focusing not only on a child's academic education, but also boosting their social skills and their emotional intelligence, studies show decreased dropout rates, school and classroom behavior issues, drug use, teen pregnancy, mental health problems, and criminal behavior. All of those areas are improved by social and emotional learning. And what about trauma-informed care? Trauma-informed care is an approach that anyone can use when interacting with someone who has experienced trauma. So it is not providing direct services for mental health treatment and healing, but rather receiving training in trauma-informed care will better prepare us to identify when a child is demonstrating signs of having experienced trauma, and that enables us to help connect him or her to the treatment they need. It also educates us about practices and decisions we can take to foster a safe and caring environment that avoids triggering children with a history of trauma and helps them flourish as they overcome barriers created by trauma. So that's a really important strategy that we want to see become more and more popular and employed in schools and in different organizations that kids are a part of, extracurricular activities, even at home. Another great strategy for opening up conversations about mental health with children is to read about different topics. So reading about things like worry and anxiety or handling our emotions. These are 3 of the books that we actually use in our ETSI curriculum, the Erasing the Stigma Youth Program. And these help facilitate conversations with kids about these different subjects in a way that is engaging, but also helps build connections. And it's another way to get kids away from the screen, which especially these days is a win. A final tip I would suggest is to look into mindfulness education for kids and youth. And so you might ask, why mindfulness? Mindfulness has actually been shown to effectively reduce symptoms of anxiety, depression, and other mental health challenges, as well as building neuroplasticity. In fact, studies suggest that mindfulness meditation can reduce symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder 73% of the time. So there are a lot of resources you can access online regarding mindfulness, as well as different apps you can download. Actually, Camille and I are both particularly fond of the Plum Village app, which is, you can see the little advertisement on the slide there. And they've actually developed a lot of mindfulness resources specifically designed for children. And this is a great strategy for that you can implement in classrooms, or again, in those extracurricular activities, or at home as well. So before I wrap up, I just wanted to throw up a few mental health resources here in Tennessee, including the statewide crisis line and helpline. The crisis line is a number we could call in lieu of calling the police, potentially, if someone we know is having a mental health emergency. And finally, if you're interested in taking a screening for different mental health conditions such as depression or anxiety, we recommend visiting our website, where you can get screened and get connected to further resources. And I think we will be sending along these slides at the end in case you wanted to access any of that information at a later time. So that's sort of a general overview of the topic that I wanted to provide. And now I'd like to go ahead and pass it along to my colleague, Camille, who's going to talk more about what this looks like for the immigrant and refugee community.
Okay, yes, hello. Thank you for allowing me to have this opportunity to speak with you today about our Unaccompanied Minors program. So I have been working with Mental Health America of the Mid-South for a couple of years now, and I've been working with unaccompanied minors. So I think it's important to first mention that they come to this country with a lot of adverse childhood experiences. So even before we're talking about the pandemic, the current climate that we have right now, a lot of fear around discrimination, deportation, they already come to us with perhaps severe trauma, and that can be from years of separation from their family, witnessing violence, extreme poverty, so the kind of poverty that is in and of itself a type of trauma, you know, not knowing whether your family will be able to eat is another kind of trauma. And so it's really important to keep that in mind, but I wanted to just take a few minutes to share a program and the story, one specific story, but just to sort of give you some understanding about these kids that come here to seek refuge and asylum. And then I would like to talk about some particular concerns that we're dealing with now as far as COVID. Again, sort of a climate of fear that we're in, climate change, some of the current conditions that are exacerbating the challenges for these kids and immigrant families. And then I'll suggest some organizations that if you want to get involved, and also our incredible referral sources. If you know of a child or someone that needs, for example, bilingual counseling, low cost, where to seek referrals. So what does the term unaccompanied child mean? It is a child under 18. So this is a legal definition. Okay, so it's a child under 18 who has no lawful immigration status in the US and who either has no parent or legal guardian in the US, technology challenge at the moment, has no parent or legal guardian in the US or has no parent or legal guardian available to provide for him or her at the time of apprehension. And they often make the journey on their own without a family member. And reasons for migration, usually it is to reunify with a family member in the US. And this can occur at the same time that they're fleeing persecution from gangs, corruption, or being part of a targeted group, abuse, neglect, or abandonment, domestic violence, and escaping poverty. So the children that we work with come primarily from an area of Central America called the Northern Triangle, and that's Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. You can see the percentage of the kids that come, what country they are from originally. A little bit about the route that they make. So they come very long way, depending if they're coming, which country they are coming from. Some of the risks that they take are riding cargo trains as stowaways, risk of physical and sexual assault, kidnapping, extreme desert temperatures, exhaustion, heat stroke, dehydration, harsh and dangerous terrain, and human trafficking. I wanted to just show you these numbers briefly so you could get sort of an idea of how much migration has increased over the last 6 years. 7 years here. And we'll continue to talk a little bit about the reasons why. But as you can see, we are talking about a lot of children that I believe deserve to have their story told and for us to know what we can do to help. So some of the factors that contribute are escalating violence in Central America and the breakdown of the rule of law, environmental disasters that devastate communities that rely on agriculture for their livelihood. And then we have to talk about the lack of movement by Congress on comprehensive immigration reform. In 2014, ORR's, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, contracted with various partners to be able to activate large influx shelters in case of future surges of children being apprehended by Customs and Border Patrol. 2016, the crisis numbers of 2014 were surpassed, and 2 major emergency influx shelters had to be opened to provide sufficient bed space for unaccompanied children and Office of Refugee Resettlement care. Now I will have a short video so you have an opportunity to hear from someone, their story.
Bueno, mi nombre es Oscar Leonel Torcifunes y yo soy de Honduras. Tengo 18 años. Yo vengo huyendo de mi país porque mataron a mi papá, a mi hermano, me querían matar a mí. Entonces mi mamá decidió que yo tenía que dejar el país. Entonces opté por venirme para aquí. Mi papá se dio cuenta que a mí me fascinaba lo que eran las computadoras y pues él decidió abrir un negocio así de internet y ponerlo en mis manos, porque él me dijo que si a mí me gustaba tenía que salir adelante con él. Aquí está mi papá, mi hermano y nosotros, la familia completa. Yo, mi hermano, mi mamá. Cuando veo esas fotos me traen recuerdos bonitos. Bueno, los recuerdos cuando estábamos todos juntos. Empezaron los problemas en la ciudad. Empezaron a meterse los pandilleros de la MS-13. Empezaron ellos a mandarnos cartas, a decirnos que teníamos que pagarle renta. Ellos empezaron pidiendo 100 lempiras, pero después, al ver que nosotros miraban que no les dábamos, que ellos pensaron que nosotros nos estábamos rehusando, y ahí nos fueron pidiendo 200, y así sucesivamente, ¿me entiendes? Hasta que nosotros paramos, y fue que ellos secuestraron a mi hermano. Fue algo horrible, ¿para qué? Todavía eso lo tengo fresquecito en mi memoria, que no se va a borrar. No sé cómo, pero en un tiempo que estuvimos bien, empezaron a llamar a mi mamá, empezaron a llamarme a mí, amenazándonos. Tuve que venirme porque yo sabía que ahí estaba corriendo peligro, y ahí corro peligro yo, y pues es un miedo grande que tengo todavía. Mi viaje completo, desde que salí de Honduras hasta que entré a Estados Unidos, me duró 1 mes y medio. Bueno, ese viaje fue difícil porque entrando a México tuve que pasarlo en el tren. El tren La Bestia. Son trenes de carga, pero nosotros que venimos como inmigrantes, nosotros lo agarramos como un transporte que es peligroso y a la vez arriesgado. Pues cuando entré a los centros de detención, ahí sí me di cuenta que no era el único que venía huyendo de mi país. Ahí fue como estar en los mismos, ¿me entiendes? Está con la misma situación. Esta es una mini baleada.
Es mini baleada, una sencilla baleada, nada más.
Lo que menos quiero pensar es que me digan que me van a deportar para mi país. Tengo la bendición de estar con gente que me ayuda en realidad. Y pues no quiero pensar que me lo vayan a negar. Bueno, mis planes aquí son estudiar. Yo quiero terminar mis estudios, graduarme siendo técnico o ingeniero en computación. Ayudar a rehacerle una nueva vida a mi mamá, ayudándole económicamente, porque con esa mentalidad uno se viene para este país. Yo quiero mi baleada.
Okay, so now that you've had sort of an opportunity to think about unaccompanied children and then just sort of moving in the direction of thinking about immigrant families and additional challenges, and we've already talked a lot about ACEs and the current time we're in, just in general, and how exacerbated it is right now. It's important to know that immigrant communities, and specifically we're speaking of Latino community here in Davidson County, is very disproportionately affected. So on the slide you can see that, and this was October 6th, so it's a little different now, but at that time 19.4% of cases, and even though the population, the Latino population, is only 10.4%. So a major difference there. And that's because families have no choice except to work outside the home. There are no let me adapt it to work inside the home options. Also, as for reasons that you can imagine, they're in multi-generational households, and they really just have a lot of people in the home that they can expose, and there isn't even the realistic possibility to not expose others in the home. With that being said, on top of that, you have limited access to resources. So a lot of people that are here struggling to survive, make a better life for themselves and their families, contributing enormously to our society, enriching our society and our economy, but they lack resources. They lack health insurance often, and that's mental health and physical health insurance, and they don't qualify for, say, the safety net program for mental health. So they really don't have that extra support when they need it, and really just no government assistance of any kind for the most part. And then even when they might seek additional help, sometimes there's just fear around seeking help. And one of those fears is hospital bills. So no one wants to, come away with thousands of dollars in debt. And that's why I consider it really important in the work that I do to make sure that clients are aware of emergency TEN care. So they are protected by law, even if you're undocumented. If you have an emergency, you can go to the hospital and say, when you first get there, and this is before services are rendered, you do have to do that. So I try to really drive that point home, but they should be able to go and ask for emergency help and say that they would like to apply for emergency TEN care. There's another program called Children's Special Services. So this doesn't exclude any child as long as they meet the criteria for having a pre-existing condition and certain diagnosis. If you're a child, you are protected. They cover the cost of those things that are approved, the diagnosis, the testing, and the care that they do get pre-approved for. So that fortunately there's at least that program that does cover some kids. And then Cover Kids for pregnant women. If you're pregnant, you're not excluded from receiving health insurance, and you can do that through the Cover Kids program. So we talked about ACEs. We talked about signs and symptoms of anxiety and depression. And if you imagine that these kids, are coming here with complex trauma and a lot of adverse childhood experiences, and then you add on to that the fear that they may experience in the household, and that fear may be from their parents who are concerned about whether they may be deported or experiencing some form of discrimination. I recently spoke with a mom. Her child is my client, and she has 6 children. She had a domestic dispute, and I suppose her partner wanted to take their child in the car and leave with the child. So in order to stop him from doing that, she did vandalize his car. And she wanted to call the police, for help. So the police came, and in the end, she expressed to me that she felt it was discrimination because she had 3 criminal charges and was taken to jail. And this was despite the fact that her partner had said, no, I don't want to press charges. And in her mind, it was relatively minor incident. And now she's worried about being deported and who will take care of her 6 children. So these are real concerns that are just really layer upon layer of additional fears and concerns that immigrant families might have. School challenges is also another additional concern that many immigrant children have and their parents, because they may lack the language literacy skills to ask for help when they need it, to call the technology line when the computer isn't working, and they lack computer literacy skills. So it's been very hard for all families right now. And just to imagine having the additional challenge of not speaking the language well and perhaps not knowing how to use a computer. And as you've heard in the story that I shared and a little bit what I've talked about up to this point, it's easy to imagine that a lot of kids come here with the dream of being able to provide the basic necessities for their family. So during this time of COVID, some clients that I've had, and when I say client, I mean the child that I'm helping in their family, they are easily distracted from school. So I believe it takes more engagement and teachers to reach out and to really provide the help that's needed so that they don't lose interest in school and don't drop out of school. So those are just some things that I'm seeing with some of the families that I'm working with, that during this time, that there are some kids that are losing interest and dropping out of school, which is really sad. Finally, I just wanted to talk about climate change, because this is something that we know is not going away. And we need to think about all of the factors and reasons for migration, and to really get a complete picture of how much help will be needed, and continue to think about ways to help. But I got this excerpt from an article, and it's from the Federation of American Scientists organization. And it says, external shocks have exacerbated the difficult socioeconomic conditions in the region. According to 2018 World Risk Index, El Salvador and Guatemala are among the 15 countries in the world most at risk from natural disasters due to their frequent exposure and weak response capacity. The Central American Dry Corridor, which encompasses 58% of El Salvador, 38% of Guatemala, and 21% of Honduras, is extremely susceptible to irregular rainfall. According to 2017 United Nations World Food Program study, repeated droughts since 2014 have destroyed crops and resulted in levels of food insecurity that have not been previously seen in the region. This reportedly has forced households to engage in extreme coping strategies such as taking on debt, selling off land, and migrating. So having said all of that, then that was a lot of information and a lot of things to consider condensed into just a few slides. I believe the question is, what's the best way to help? And I believe that it's helping the organizations that are working tirelessly to help immigrants and refugees. And I think that we have amazing organizations doing incredible work here in Nashville. And these are just some of them. So the Tennessee Immigrants and Refugee Rights Coalition, Conexión Américas, Casa Safran, and they have their own referral line, Conexión Américas. And they offer programming in so many different areas, from education to seeking legal aid. I had mentioned before, if you would like to find a counselor, a bilingual, low-cost counselor for someone, they would be a good place to check out their referral line. We also have Workers' Dignity, Hispanic Family Foundation, Nashville International Center for Empowerment, and they work with immigrants from all over the world. And so these are just some of them here in Nashville, but yeah, I think that if you're looking for resources or would like to get involved, this is a good place to start in terms of familiarizing yourself with what we do have here in Nashville and how to get involved and make a difference. And there are resources too if you are just at home and you want to do a search. Camino Seguro, which is part of the Vanderbilt Disability Pathfinder. So there's the English version, it's the Disability Pathfinder, and this is through Vanderbilt. And then they have one in Spanish called Camino Seguro. So it's just a search engine, and you'll be able to put in whatever you're looking for in whatever county throughout Tennessee. So if it's Wilson County and you're looking for a bilingual counselor, you'd be able to go and search for that. So it's pretty comprehensive, and it does cover the entire state of Tennessee. And I just wanted to mention that Mental Health America also does a monthly networking group for service providers, but it's anyone in the community that has an interest in helping the Latino community here in Nashville. We get together to share resources, what needs we have, and it's also just a way to connect and build relationships here in Nashville that have a similar goal. And you could email me and join our monthly networking meeting. And I also send out updates. Most weeks I send out certain updates about resources that are available, events, etc. So thank you very much. And I have come to the end of my presentation, and I think we wanted to take some time to see if you had any questions.
Thank you so much, Camille and Heather. That was really a lot of great information. Reminder, everybody, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. We still have a few minutes so we can get to those. And while people think about those questions, I will ask one that I was curious about. Do you guys have any sense of the role of social media in terms of the mental health challenges that are facing children and youth today? I'm specifically thinking about something I read that said that kids today are kind of more isolated because of social media, and also the prevalence of cyberbullying plays a role in that. So I was just wondering, is it all bad in terms of social media, or are there any upsides to that for kids and youth?
The first thing that came to my mind in just regards to the children that I serve is how, I like to talk to them about using social media safely, because often they do rely on the internet to keep in touch with family in their home countries. And that's really important for their sense of connectedness. And that just really helps with the transition to stay in touch with loved ones and to feel connected. So I think for them, it does have a very definite upside.
Yeah, and just to speak to that more generally, actually in our Erasing the Stigma Youth Program, we do these different educational presentations in schools. And one of the most popular presentations that we get requested is the anti-bullying. And as included in that is the whole idea of cyberbullying that you mentioned. And so it's definitely something that educators are finding necessary to talk about with kids these days. And I think that there are studies out there that demonstrate the toll that it takes on kids' mental health and their anxiety. So it's a very real issue, certainly. I would say that just like it is for adults, both a good thing and a bad thing, that can be true for kids as well, especially as they come into those teenage years. There are really helpful apps out there. I have information on those, not handy at the moment, but that I could send, as well as just different platforms and movements that are happening. We look at things like the Me Too movement or Black Lives Matter movement. There's definitely a positive side to it as well.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much. So again, if you have questions, feel free to pop them in. I'm going to share my screen one last time to show a resource that we offer, or resources that we've put together at the Tennessee Justice Center. And this is just a screenshot of, I went back to the beginning, sorry. A screenshot of our website. And so one of the tabs, if you go to tnjustice.org/COVID-19-updates and go scroll to the bottom, there are a collection of resources there. And one of the tabs is mental health resources. So you can see here information about Tennessee's crisis text line, as well as Agape counseling services, information about connecting to charitable clinics for people who don't have insurance or can't afford to seek those services, the suicide prevention lifeline, etc., as well as resources that Metro schools in Nashville have compiled to help students and families who typically rely on school mental health resources. Because a lot of kids are not in school right now, it's important to make sure that they still have access to those resources. And I also just want to emphasize that for kids who qualify for TennCare, that is a comprehensive program that covers mental health services, but we know that a lot of times those services may not be readily available, or kids may have issues with denials from their managed care organization that's responsible for administering their TennCare benefits. So again, if you know of people who are having issues accessing services for TennCare, specifically for kids, everything that a kid needs that a doctor says is medically necessary, including mental health or behavioral health services, should be covered for children on TennCare. So please feel free to reach out to the Tennessee Justice Center if you encounter any issues with that. And I'm going to go ahead and put the link to that COVID-19 update website that has those resources for people to check out. So I don't see any questions in the Q&A box. Again, Camille and Heather, really great presentations. Thank you both so much for joining us. We're really grateful to Mental Health America of the Mid-South for partnering with us on the webinar today. And be on the lookout for a follow-up email with the slides, as well as a recording and any other additional resources that we think are important for you to have. So thanks again, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.